and just like my name tag and the bio in the booklet, and I'll be joined very shortly by Jennifer Clinton of Global Ties US, and I'll introduce her properly at that moment, but her bio as well is in the booklet. And so let's begin. We were commissioned, Zogby Strategies, to conduct a survey of Ohio businesses relative to the question of hiring international students and ensuring a better long-term relationships with international students here in Ohio. We conducted the survey in August and much of September, and I'm going to be sharing some highlights via PowerPoint of that survey analysis that we did. What I wanted to do, however, since there are a number of employers that are here and government officials, is just talk a bit about something that I've been talking about with groups all over the world, actually, the last 15 years, and that is millennials, and the importance of understanding millennials. And the key question that's always asked is, well, why are you spending so much time on millennials? And the obvious answer is because there are so many of them. I'm a baby boomer. Much was made out of us. We were 78 million strong. And here we are, if we take millennials right now, born between 1979 and 1997, 18 to 37 years of age, we are already at approaching 84 million millennials and no end in sight. So sheer size is important. Last year they surpassed 1/3 of America's labor force. They are approaching, within 5 years or so, well over 40% of America's labor force. By 2020, millennials will be 40% of the electorate in the United States. So size is one thing. Culture is another that we need to understand. And I refer to age cohorts. And that's, I think, a thing that everybody needs to understand, including you millennials who are nodding your heads right now, is that we have age groups. That's where you are in the life cycle. And age cohorts, that's where you are historically and culturally. And I just want to explain that for a moment, because it's so vital. An age group is where you are in the life cycle. And so there are common behaviors among 20-somethings. You know, traditionally, a greater focus on the self, on me, on my future, my career, my relationship, how do I look, what should I wear, that sort of thing. Then traditionally you move into your 30s and you begin to resolve some of those me questions, begin to start looking beyond into the community, start to resolve the issue of a relationship and maybe property and family, and then and so on into your 40s and 50s and 60s. But an age cohort really is when history invades the lives of young people and implants in those young people a set of values that they will carry with them for the rest of their lives. And so one of my favorite stories is my economics professor, my freshman year in college, who fought in World War II and would regale us with stories about World War II. But what stuck all these years later is how he would say, you know, we were just a bunch of guys sitting in a dorm room Saturday night, December 6, 1941. We were talking about girls and beer and sports. And he said, 6:45, Monday morning, December 8th, 1941, we were standing outside in a line in selective service. We couldn't wait to register for the draft and to fight to protect America and its values. What intervened in between was Pearl Harbor, and the point being that he and they, because you'll hear the very similar story among those few veterans that are still alive today, but Pearl Harbor invaded their lives and they became the greatest generation. We boomers, what invaded our lives was television. We grew up in a very simple world, you know, us, them, good, evil, the free world, communists. And for us, television brought home civil rights demonstrators, anti-war protests. How can this happen in a country that is so virtuous? We became, and our size mattered as well, we became a rebellious group and carried that rebellion with us. After us, Generation X, born into an America that was falling apart. You know, from political assassinations to Watergate, the worst political crisis, governmental crisis in our history, to losing a war in Vietnam, to no longer being able to control commodities markets, to so on and so forth. This is a group, this is the most libertarian of our age cohorts, because they've had to go out and kind of recreate institutions, including marriage and the family, that was beginning to fall apart and dissolve, at least in relation to how families have been traditionally. So enter now millennials. And the defining term that intervenes in their lives is technology. And you know, we all have had to deal with technology, but ever-changing, constantly changing technology that needs to be learned, that needs to be mastered, that needs to be purchased, that needs to be relearned, that needs to be taught to folks like me, and over, you have to stay on top of technology. And that has created a much smaller world. That has created a sense of endless mobility and endless possibility. And this is a group that I call America's first globals. First global citizens. First age cohort to play more soccer than baseball, basketball, or football. First age cohort to not have to go to the library at night because it's all there on the internet. And then it's all there in the palm of your hand. And then it's all there in terms of relationships on social media. When I survey millennials today and ask them who is in your social network, American millennials, the lowest percentage, the 31% who say, I have someone in my social network who is from sub-Saharan Africa. I mean, this is awesome. At the same time, mobility. The whole world is the playing field. I've seen the numbers go up. 75% of millennials want to be married or have a long-term relationship. 26%, an unheard of number. It used to be 16% when I wrote my first book about millennials just a few years ago. 26% say it's very likely that I and my significant other will be living on 2 different continents. 25% that will raise a child while living on 2 different continents. Millennials are a group, what is very important to them, the 85%, much higher than any other age cohort, and up 10 percentage points, I should say, over just the past few years. I want to leave this world a better place because of something that I have contributed. Much higher than any of the other age cohorts. 76% want to work for an entity that affords them that opportunity to be a force for change in their world. 62% say that it is very important or somewhat important that they be fluent in a foreign language to help in their career. Now, not that they're studying that foreign language, but honestly, I mean this very seriously, a pollster would not have even thought of asking that question 20 years ago. Learn English or you're on your own was the American attitude. This is a few more points for employers, some things that we need to understand because I raised millennials and I employed millennials for years. They're not 9 to 5. They're 7 and 24. When you've got a social network that is global, What are time zones? You gotta be on constantly. You need to understand that millennials work in teams, not hierarchy. Very important to understand. They are horizontal in terms of their decision making, and groups of millennials do not automatically pick the captain or the vice president. They say, I want to know by my peers how I contributed to the success of the team. So these are just, I hope, some useful facts. So we surveyed, Dave? We surveyed 200 Ohio businesses of all sizes, from those with $10 million in revenues and up, and some of $5 million in revenues and down, and many in between. And here we are. This just sort of gives you an idea of the distribution. So, you know, better than a fifth, almost a quarter manufacturing. We had aerospace, biohealth, a quarter or so IT, computer related, energy, mining, and so on. Hopefully, let's try that again. Dave. I need a millennial. No, not just saying. We should all have a devoted millennial concierge to follow us. How's that for job growth? This is not a staged thing.
I'm not a millennial. I just play one on TV.
There we go. Okay. All right, among the companies that we surveyed, just to get some sort of a profile here, about a third presently have operations outside the U.S., and almost half plan to expand their revenue outside the U.S. Okay, we asked what skills are missing in the talent pool for which you're recruiting, and what we saw was very interesting, because there's always a lot of talk about IT and about computer skills, but look at this very closely. More than half said multilingual speakers. About 38% did say specialized PC operations, but over 40% said knowledge of foreign markets. They wanted folks that could handle global marketing. 35% cultural knowledge. You did have engineering, you did have IT, international logistics as well. I thought that was just really fascinating. Has your company employed international talent that has attended institutions of higher ed in Ohio? 3 out of 5 said yes, they have. Less than 1 in 3 said no. Now, here are some possible barriers to your company tapping into the international talent pool, educated by Ohio colleges and universities. They were asked to select which of these has been a problem. 37% cultural differences, 44% language differences. About a fourth said current hiring practices. 20% said family or government. And then that last item there, about 1 in 6, said perceived community hostility. A factor, but nowhere near the factor that cultural differences and language differences are. How about expanding relationships and partners with Ohio-G.R.E.A.T? 69, almost 70% said that they'd be interested in partnering with Ohio-G.R.E.A.T. And 72%, slightly more, were willing to expand relations with Ohio-G.R.E.A.T. So we listed some ways that the state government can assist your company, and here's what they said. 2 out of 3 said getting more access to a relevant talent pool. About half said getting access to research, particularly their industry related. Almost half, 45%, would be very grateful to have the process of immigration processing and vetting offered by the state of Ohio. 36% said state assistance in the E-Verify practices. About the same said U.S. acculturation training would be important. We asked how many people were aware of these offerings, that all international students can work with businesses for a year after graduation. Two out of three said that they were aware, but almost 1 in 4 said they were not aware of that. That Ohio businesses opportunities there are opportunities for international students. In the blue, international STEM grads can work up to 3 years for Ohio business. 75% were aware of that. About 2 out of 3 were aware that international students can work in part-time internships with Ohio businesses, and all international grads may work at least 1 year in major related business. So there was a high awareness, but also a decent representation who are not aware. How about programs for STEM talent and hires? In the blue, they're both about the same, 2 out of 3. International STEM grads with knowledge of their home country, foreign markets, and customer language. They would like to see a program for that, and a program that allows 3-year STEM hires to work overseas or become an H-1B worker in Ohio. And then finally, how important is it that the state of Ohio help open avenues for smaller businesses to expand their businesses overseas? 55% said very important, another 32 said somewhat important, a grand total then of 87% that said that it was vital, a consensus, that the state help with smaller businesses to expand business overseas. And so that is the survey and the analysis, at least the highlights that we produced. Obviously, great implications for those of you that are here, but there are broader implications as well. Dr. Jennifer Clinton is the president of Global Ties US, which helped to spearhead this program with Ohio-G.R.E.A.T, and has some comments even beyond Ohio, but Ohio related as well, as to why these results are important.
Thank you, John. And John and I are going to do a little kind of interview-style discussion about the results in a minute. But I just wanted to share a little bit kind of from a national perspective. As John mentioned, I'm the CEO of a nonprofit organization based in Washington, D.C. called Global Ties. We work very closely with the U.S. Department of State to really work across the country. We have affiliated organizations in 45 states and 90 communities who are all working to strengthen ties between individuals and nations. And we do this through administering international exchange programs, but we also do this through raising the awareness of the importance of really leveraging relationships that are frankly at our fingertips. And we as an organization have been very committed to looking at the incredible resource that international students who are studying in U.S. institutions bring to this country, not only for talent, we talked a lot today about the skills gap, but also to help our American students be more worldly, be more global, as John talked about. So when this whole initiative came to my attention through our member, we have 5 members in the state of Ohio: the Cleveland Council for World Affairs, the International Visitors Council of Columbus, Wright State University, World Affairs Council in Cincinnati, and Global Ties Akron. All of them work very closely together, but in their communities are really working to find ways to connect the business community with international populations. So this whole initiative came to my attention in Washington through our member here in Columbus as really a model of an amazing effort by the governor's office and the Department of Higher Education as a sort of a model for the rest of the country to hold up as this is an amazing effort to really try and maximize the relationships between government, higher ed, and the business community. And I'll tell you, I work with a lot of different organizations in many different cities, from Chicago to Los Angeles, Seattle, Miami. This is really the only example I've seen where there is an entity working to bring the higher ed community together with businesses. Normally you have efforts by higher ed working to recruit talent, right? We all want more international students in our schools, but the whole notion of not just recruiting, but retaining, engaging, and connecting is very unique. And what's interesting for us, and why I'm here today, is to really take this example to other communities across the U.S., to other states, through our network of organizations, and say, hey, this is working. And we now have data that demonstrates that where the kind of the gap is between the connection between businesses and higher ed, and to really focus on and spotlight this initiative that is impacting Ohio, but frankly could play a role with the rest of the country in impacting other communities and states around the country for the U.S. to maintain or to get back its leadership, its global leadership and competitiveness. So I just want to give a lot of kudos to Lauren and the governor's office for this effort, and I'm really, really excited about the results of what we've learned today. So with that, I have a number of questions for John to kind of shed some more light on.
And I want to thank Lauren
Yes.
for the opportunity to work with you. And to be easy to work with too.
Ask some questions of John, and then we'll certainly open it up to the audience. So just to give us a little bit more flavor of this really interesting data. So question, John, in terms of why, this is really, as far as we know, the first study of this kind. So I'd love to hear your thoughts on why you think it's groundbreaking and why you think it's so important.
Because it provides the data for us to something that we assumed was correct, but we just didn't really have the numbers before. Do international students want to stay? Sure. Can they maintain some sort of bond with the state or the institution where they attended? Sure. We kind of have a sense. Do businesses need young talent? And should businesses be limited in the pool of that young talent? The answer is no. Is there a role for a state government to play that is creative, that facilitates this triangulation, of higher ed, students, faculty, administration, higher ed, state government, and employers? Absolutely. But we have real numbers here. Getting 200 businesses to respond to a survey is a big deal. And
You got 236.
And we got 236.
So to just give a little context about how this study went, John and his team actually started with a set of 25 interviews and then went out with a larger survey. So I'd love to hear a little bit about the tenor of those conversations, those individual conversations that you had with the businesses.
Sometimes, no, all the time, when you do individual interviews, you kind of wonder, how's this all going to gel together? So we had developed a set, actually, of about 50 questions or so, and we actually got some people from some of the, some larger businesses in particular, and some prominent businesses, maybe not large, but prominent enough to actually talk to us. And it started to gel, as it usually does, a critical mass, after about 10 or 11 interviews. We're sort of on to something. And know that when you do those 25 interviews, you're actually producing a document that is worthy of itself. That there's actually a statement that comes from that, kind of a consensus around these kinds of issues. But the other value in doing those initial interviews is that you also get to learn what questions you should ask to the larger audience that you may not have anticipated. And so it sharpened the survey instrument that we were able to use. And then from there, getting all those people to respond and seeing those numbers actually I didn't know what to expect. You know, we all had a hunch, but it's so great to see numbers like that. Know that the wind is at your back.
Could you find, another question is in terms of trends and responses by sector. So we saw the types of industries that you talked to, heavy focus on manufacturing, IT. Were there any kind of groupings by sector in terms of responses that you found?
Yeah, remember now when you're looking at 200 or so, when you get down to like 2 or 3%, it's hard to paint a picture. But clearly, you know, manufacturing and aerospace, you know, the directional signals were clear. These are the groups that really want to expand overseas, that listed a number of countries, some kind of unexpected, that they wanted to pursue. They were the ones too that needed the help with foreign languages and cultural assistance. Some, obviously the larger ones, can deal with those issues internally, but others, you know, are not going to be able to, but yet they want to be players on the stage. What languages? Really across the board, but obviously Mandarin, Hindi, Arabic, Portuguese, because a lot of folks focusing on Brazil, or at least the next Brazil. It was really across the board.
We heard earlier today of just the statistics and the largest trading partners, with Ohio being Canada and Mexico, and it seems like there was a lot of desire, a lot of companies already engaged internationally, probably with those two markets, but also really wanting to push the envelope in terms of other countries that they're connecting with.
Absolutely, yeah, and a lot of companies here in the state that are doing business directly with Quebec in particular.
Question for you. So we've got kind of 3 different audiences in the room. We've got businesses, we've got representatives from higher ed, and then we also have government officials. So what would you say for each of those groups the key takeaways are? And we've got copies, as I mentioned, of the study here, the report, for you to take with you. But thinking about those 3 audiences, what do you hope they walk away with from this report?
Well, those of you that are in government, hit the ground running. You know that there is a demand for these services. And those of you in particular that work or intersect with Ohio-G.R.E.A.T or higher education, what you have been hoping for and dreaming about is very real. And so now you've got the data to support it. To the businesses, that's a hard one, because certainly on one hand, you're looking for specific skills, and there is an emphasis, at least on what I heard today, particularly, you know, in the IT kinds of skills. But at the same time, be mindful of the liberal arts, be mindful of those who are developing cultural knowledge, language knowledge. Be mindful of those students that say, I want to travel, I want to go overseas, or international students in particular, that I'd like to be a bridge builder. So whether you're starting operations overseas, look to see who may be going home and can be that natural bridge builder. Well, hey, why recreate the wheel? And to the students, you got a future here in Ohio, guys.
So kind of honing in on one of the questions that you asked in terms of what were the skills that these companies were really looking for, and I think all 3 of us, Lauren, John, and I, were assuming that it was going to be heavy IT STEM focused. But what we did see was more language, knowledge of other markets. Can you comment on that and kind of what do you think that's telling us?
Well, it's telling us that folks are smart enough, companies large and small, that if you have a shot to do business overseas, you get that shot once, and you got to do it right. And the best way to do it right is to have people who understand culture. Look, I've done business all over the world, and I've made mistakes, and it's not pleasant. when you do. And well, I'd be embarrassed to tell you some of the things. But to know that, let's narrow it down, that there are international students who are being acculturated here, but who understand their culture back home, or have the capacity, because they've already learned a second culture, to perhaps be able to learn in a facilitated way a third and a fourth culture. There are resources out there, and the universities perhaps are being underutilized. Frankly, so are the community colleges.
Another question I have is one of the key elements that we were really trying to get at in this survey, which is designed and developed to really inform how to focus the efforts of the Ohio-G.R.E.A.T initiative. So, trying to establish that baseline and look at, so we know there's this gap of connecting students with companies. What are the specific barriers? And so there was a question to that point. And a little bit surprising too on the answers to this question was really about access. Just not having enough access and connections to the talent or to the university partnerships. So I'd love for you to comment on that as well.
That's, in my experience anyway, that's a miscommunication. When you're running a business, no matter how large or small, you're busy and you're focused on day-to-day operations. Even within those companies, HR people, our marketing people are very, very busy, and sometimes reaching out, they'll attend conferences like this and so on, but it's finding the time to connect. But more importantly, what it is just a lack of awareness of the services. I don't think it's anybody's fault. I'm sure, I'm from New York State, and I know that folks would visit on a regular basis, and I'd always put down, hey, I've got to follow up, I've got to get back, I've got to learn more about what they offer, and you just don't do that. But here's a way of knowing, especially for those businesses that are interested, and as you can see, it's most. In both international students and pursuing revenues and or operations overseas, that there are resources there. And so it's not the sort of thing that's going to take television ads. It's going to be pounding the pavement and making visits, doing the hard work of the one-on-one. But everybody stands to gain from that.
So I'd love to turn it over to you guys. See if you have some questions, please.
Yeah, hi. It seems that the businesses, from your data, they understand that there's these opportunities, OPT opportunities for foreign students to participate in their business. And a sophisticated business would capture that, because it seems that on the other side, that they want that skill set, the cultural skill set that those foreign students would be able to bring to their business. Why do you think it's not happening now? Is it happening? And then how can the state of Ohio, push that further?
That's going to require the human touch. And incidentally, that's Cindy from the Lieutenant Governor's office. We chatted about some things. Yeah, that's where the outreach becomes human and personal. I mean, what are some little things? Reaching out, having a team of people. That's one good place to do some hiring right there. Is people, particularly with the human skills, in those liberal arts. Sorry for pushing that, but that can actually pound the pavement, do some outreach. I would think having a phone number as well, where a human being actually answers the telephone, might not hurt either. Those are little things, but it's not going to be public service announcements. It's not going to be making the printers of Ohio very, very rich and very happy. It's really going to have to be that pavement pounding.
Sorry, I have one follow-up. Do you think that the individuals that knew about these opportunities were also the individuals that were seeking the cultural skill set
that's a cross tabulation that needs to be done, and we did not do that. But that's a very, very good question, and we could just sort of make a note of that. You know, I'm pointing to my sons and business partners, and they did much of the work on this project. But yeah, that is a, you know, what kind of intersection is there between those two groups? That would be good.
This study certainly substantiates some of the concerns, but for policy development purposes, how we need to more about rules and so I assume that there is a multiplication of companies, say, by industries, and probably we also need the criteria for the selection of these companies and who and if any declaration of which kind of companies are installed. I mean, out of these two concepts.
Yeah, the full report is here, and it has a lot of the cross-tabulated data. There are also about 50, 60 pages of just the data that I'm happy to, because it's released to the public, I'm happy to make available, you know, to you, or further analysis if you require it. The selection process is, we did target SIC codes, codes that are established by the U.S. Bureau of Census, and then there were other businesses that listed other, and those, you know, those get very granular. But you did see in the very first slide anyway, you know, manufacturing and energy and public utility, that sort of thing. And some of the cross tabulations are very useful because they have decent subgroup size. Others are very small, but still, you know, somebody with a seasoned mind, you know, good experienced mind could make something out of it.
Could you tell us anything about regional variation? I'm wondering about the impact of things like the Welcome-G initiative, places that present themselves as a.
You know, we did not do a regional breakdown, but we have the capacity to do the regional breakdown. And could certainly do that by the major you know, regions, not the metro areas necessarily, but at least the major regions in the state. Sorry about that, but we just didn't do that. Yeah. The industries, no, the industries, yes, we do have that.
My question is related to your comment about millennials in the beginning, especially how you describe the mobility and the impact of technology. How do you see that impacting the role in higher education over the next few years? And do you see any relationship with what you asked the businesses about?
Well, yeah, I mean, if the expectations are to be hiring people in long-term careers, I'm not going to say that that is entirely not a part of the millennial culture, but it is not an essential ingredient of the millennial culture. These are young people who have developed a spirit of mobility for a variety of reasons. One is that the first part of many of their lives was a period where they could pretty much write their ticket. And then the second part of their lives was when the ceiling came crashing down upon them. And so permanence has been less a part of their lives. Millennials, by definition, are ushering in or victims of what we call the gig economy. They understand that, you know, that as 20-somethings, they will have had 4 or 5 or more gigs by the age of 30, 10 or even a dozen by the age of 40. It is who they are. Now, can they land a good deal and stay in one place? Obviously, there are those for whom that will work. But this is complicated. My message to employers is understand them and treat them well. Because as they move on, for whatever reason it may be, they are your greatest ambassadors to the next wave of millennials. Hey, is this a good place to do a project? To work short term? Is this a place where I can change the world? That's a whole different mindset for employers. I hope that helps.
Yeah, how about higher education? Like, in my time, you could go to college for 5 years, 6 years. Do you see that duration playing a part with the mindset you talked about?
Oh, I think so. I think first of all, who is a student? We're talking more and more about lifelong learning. Where is your student? Well, increasingly, it's less about brick and mortar and more about your students from all over the world. And we're learning that faculty love that. They were the ones that were fighting it. And now, I shouldn't say faculty love it, but more and more are, because they're being exposed to resources and students that they never thought that they would have, particularly non-traditional students. Yeah, higher ed is in a tremendous state of flux, and that's a whole other conference that I'd love to be able to talk about. We have a lot of data on that one.
I have two questions, if I may. One is more data specific and one is more strategic. The data specific one is there was a slide talking about impediments, that one of the categories was hiring practices. Is there some data behind that? What was meant by hiring practices as an impediment for international students?
There was an impression that the culture of by impression I should say from the interviews and less from the survey of 200 or so, but a sense that whether it was a family-owned operation or folks just didn't want to be bothered, that the company culture was not conducive. So that was seen as an impediment by either the HR person or a knowledgeable person within the company.
So that's an opportunity for the education institution to focus on working with businesses that maybe don't have much diversity yet. How to be more open to it, how to work with people.
And then back to her question, to be able to cross-tabulate that against maybe those are the companies that said, well, we're not expanding overseas, or we're not interested in the first place, and then you got wasting any time, if that's the case.
And then my broader question is, I was thinking, Mr. Zogby, about your comment early on that larger companies often have the resources to both take advantage of the opportunities and to deal with some of the challenges that small and medium-sized companies, SMEs, may not have. Was there any part of the survey or any part of the strategy you discussed that would involve trade associations? Because, for example, a lot of SMEs, we work with a lot of SMEs, often because they don't have those deeper resources, they're going to the trade associations and asking, how do we do this? How do we get this rule changed, this law changed? How do we deal with this problem or take advantage of this opportunity? It struck me that trade associations could be a vital part of this initiative because it allows resources to be gathered together and information to be collected, centralized, disseminated in a way that could be very useful for educational institutions and the businesses that we're trying to serve.
That's a natural fit. I mean, the short answer is no, we didn't ask, and yes, I'm feeling pretty dumb that we didn't ask it. But that's a really good point. Yeah. Next year's survey.
Okay.
But that is really a vital point. And the trade association's always looking for services to justify their existence and their dues. Absolutely.
So just,
Win all the way around.
Yeah.
yeah, just one kind of dovetailing comment off of that from the initiative itself. The Lieutenant Governor's Office and the Department of Higher Ed reached out very directly to to chambers of commerce, not the metros, but also smaller, more of the regional chambers and some of the, more localized chambers. And they were very interested in having something that would be value added to their members, which is essentially, I think, what they're saying right now. So the challenge, though, and maybe, as I think I love your optimism. So going forward, what we can do is leverage this data. We needed this data to show the associations this was of value to their members. Do you know what I mean? So it's kind of like the part of the horse, So now we have the data to say, well, we talked to your members and they said this would be of value, and could you, do you have an interest in collaborating in this initiative to be a conduit of information? And, so so you're right on the, I think that's exactly where we want to go, and I think that is our next step. Whether we interview them or not, we're using this data. Yeah.
I'm up with this question. One of the things we heard this morning is the costs associated with engaging in getting green cards, getting status. For a young person coming out of college, who might be a foreign national, those costs might be one of the reasons some companies don't go forward. And was that addressed in some of the data analysis?
It was not. Now, as an employer and someone who's gone through that process, it wasn't cost prohibitive depending on what I needed that employee for. And so when you add up the total cost of lawyers that are involved in filings and so on, particularly if I'm looking for someone with specific cultural knowledge, language knowledge, it's really not a prohibitive investment. But we didn't survey it.
Mine does fell off the
Please.
I'm sorry. Let's just talk about
You're the boss.
No. If you're hiring, if you're a company where, like CCI, like the IT company that we heard from earlier, where 40, and are they in here? They may or may not be in here, so I don't want to. Huh? Oh, okay. Hey, perfect. Okay, Susan, correct me if I'm wrong.
Okay.
When you're hiring as many people or applying for H-1B, it can get very costly. In fact, it can be cost prohibitive, and there's a ceiling to it, which kind of exponentially increases the cost. So I think that for some, is that accurate?
Yes.
So I think for some companies, that's certainly a piece. What this survey, and I think the unique nature of this survey, was to introduce the reality to some companies that it's not all H-1B, that they need to be thinking beyond H-1B.
Exactly.
And,
Beginning.
yeah, that they have. So if we had quite a few conversations about, well, this is, should we catch them where they're at and pull them in, or should we just, it was a whole strategic conversation. I don't know whether, right or wrong, whatever, but we chose to go with not mentioning H-1B because we didn't want to get that, they already had that template, and we wanted to create a new template, So it was strategic, right or wrong. I don't know if we have benefited from that data. I don't know, maybe that's the next one, because we really would like companies to see the smorgasbord of opportunity. You know what I mean? That's really kind of the end game, is to see the student pathway, and then how do you transition it, and do you want them to go back to their country, taking your company's brand or taking your company, as an employee, and you want to bring them back, I don't know. To really get some, but that's 3 years down the road. You know what I mean? That's not where we chose to start.
Just a kind of a comment on the trade associations. I think that's an excellent point of view. I think there's another angle as well, is if you think about doing this survey here, what's the trade association's willingness to actually collectively work or lobby for a more thoughtful immigration process? I mean, this is all, frankly, it's all a supply-demand issue relative to the employment. And universities and other institutions are training the international students that are coming here, then there's no avenue here. There's got to be some stronger advocacy, and hopefully with a new emphasis on what immigration means, there'll be some discussion around it. But I would ask that question, not only the associations, are you willing to promote this type of thing, but are you also willing to advocate and lobby for some reasonable and thoughtful changes that have been really tied up in the legislative, Congress and Department of Labor and other places. Guys, you don't want to get on the wrong side of, so I won't name any more. But
can I add a quick thing to that? Over here is,
yeah.
I would say too, if we're talking about advocacy, it's not just for the employee, but also their family. And because the immigration process, a lot of times, they might be successful in getting an H-1B or something like that, but it's very prohibitive to a spouse or someone else like that getting engaged with
Yeah.
it. And that can be then a hindrance to that person who may want staying long-term in the country. Maybe it's just a personal example, but I personally know of people that have left the U.S. that wanted initially to stay here, but gave up because they were tired of the immigration. And it wasn't the initial employee, it was the spouse that just could not find meaningful employment. They ended up getting a master's degree, things like that, but kept running into government hurdles.
And because this could be a question to, Mr. Zogby and Jennifer, that my experience, I come from the trade association world. Prior to coming into the lieutenant governor's office, from a state level, you're not going to get the trade associations to advocate at that level for such a hot topic, especially right now, because one, that they can't really impact that because they are a state agency. On the federal level, you do see the business organizations actively lobbying for better immigration, better, I think, especially, the U.S. Chamber actively advocates for that, and surprisingly, farmer organizations do advocate for that initially. Now, on a state level, you're going to have a different kind of dynamic, but I think, as the Ohio-G.R.E.A.T initiative, what we should think about is how we can impact the businesses here at the state level and utilize the trade associations to, whether it's that we need better legislation statewide or better regulation statewide, what can we do here that can allow us to be a success?
Can I just respond to this gentleman over here who was talking about someone going from an H-1B, and they didn't stay here because there wasn't an avenue for their spouse. There actually is now, a year ago, there is an avenue if somebody is on an H-1B or F-1 and they are in the green card process. As long as the person gets back on 40, the spouse can now get what they call an H-4EAD, and they are allowed to work within the United States.
Yes.
In the earlier lectures, we noticed that statistics says that 60% of international students will come basically from 4 countries: Saudi Arabia, China, India, and I think South Korea was there too. So my question is, with your conversation with the business leaders, is it, most of these students, they come, they're sponsored by their governments, and therefore they have to go back. Does that have any negative impact on their recruitment of potential good candidates for the businesses?
I don't know, obviously from a survey standpoint, but I guess I really just don't know. I could maybe build some assumptions, but maybe that wouldn't be correct to do.
Most are not. Oh, go ahead.
Go.
No.
So I'm representative of Ohio State institutions. I'm Harlan Smith. I'm the director of the International Center at Cleveland State University. And so we have 1,500-ish international students, the majority of whom are from India. who are self-pay, private pay. And then we have a very large Saudi Arabian population who are governmental. Their governments pay. Their governments don't necessarily want them to work in the name. So that's a complication. Now, all the Indian students and the Nigerians and others that we have, they very much want to work and they want to be engaged in employment and experiential learning throughout their degree program. That get what you need.
And those are the Chinese students.
Thank you.
John, could I just ask one last question about, could you give the group a preview of the next step of this? Yeah, can we? Yeah, the board ambassador.
There is a next
The what? Oh, yes. Okay.
It's a commercial.
Thank you for
Thank
that.
you.
Yeah, sometime after the first of the year. The very last step of this is to talk with foreign officials, folks in the embassy and in embassies and consulates and so on, and talk to them directly about the opportunities for linkages and possibly the answers to the questions that were just raised, you know, about foreign students and eligibility and so on.
Your timing is great for that.
And I was hoping to avoid one day of not talking about that. Because yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thanks.